And welcome back to Cairns. We're in the Museum of Australian Armour and Artillery and looking at the M3 Medium Part 2. And you get a bonus. This is a case of buy 5, get 1 free because he just had a stupid amount of people in this tank. Now the British version, because the radio operator was superfluous, because the radio was now accessible to the commander, generally only had a crew of 6. But yes, the American version, the Lee, you had a 7th man in the hull. This led to a small problem. The Soviets, of course, famously described this vehicle as the coffin for 7 brothers, which does it a little bit of a disservice, but we'll kind of get back to that in a bit. TC's position, 3-man turret, so he's a little bit back and left. He has a rotating cupola, which I have to say rotates very easily. A simple 2-piece hatch. Of course, as the nod to silhouette issues, the British got rid of the silly cupola. And it very simply folds up and inwards, and it is the simplest system for locking the cupola hatch shut that I've ever seen in my life. He does have, for 360-degree observation, a rotatable periscope. Obviously the periscope itself has been dismounted, but it does rotate. It's not as good as a traditional vision cupola, but it's better than just having a fixed forward or left. And in all fairness, there's no obstructions on the turret roof to get in its way, except maybe the antenna mount. Not much else to be said on the outside of this turret, so let's have a look inside. All right, so now I've come into the vehicle, and because of this massive skylight premium, you've had to shut part of the hatch here. So, yeah, this is not a vehicle for standing up in on the inside. That said, the commander seat, which would ordinarily be here, has multiple attachment points. It can easily lift it up and down. You can't be sitting down, you gotta actually get off the seat to do it. But you do have a lot of flexibility to where you're gonna be. Now, in terms of turret size, this is actually quite good. The turret diameter is only 6 inches smaller than that of an M4 medium, except instead of a big 75mm and lots of ammunition, you've got a small little 37, so it's actually pretty good. Although it is interesting to note that things are slightly angled. If you're looking at the top down into this turret, if the gun is facing this way, the gunner is actually facing inward, and so would the commander be if he's sitting down with his knees clear of the gunner. And there's not actually much for the commander to play with in here. He has the bulge back here for the number 19 wireless set, and he does have the pistol port if the gunner doesn't want to shoot. And that's the gist of it, I'm afraid. It's a very simple position for the commander, so let's hop down to the gunner seat directly in front of me. So the gunner is located front left of the turret, the feet of the commander. It's got actually a surprisingly reasonable amount of room. Traverse is both power and manual. The pump for the power system is actually located under my seat. Elevation could be manual by use of the old-fashioned hand crank, or stabilized. Now the stabilizer system in its entirety has been removed from vehicles, so I guess shows you whether or not the Australians like the stabilizer function. In order to apply the stabilizer, you would have to physically disconnect the elevation gearing, turn on the stabilizer system, and then the hand wheel will be used to stabilize the gun, obviously only in elevation. And it's not a case that you're going to get great first round hits, especially not with a 37. But it will at least give you a more reasonable chance, especially if you're doing something like HE or canister. Or if nothing else, you're going to be faster laying onto a target because you won't have to reacquire the target when the tank stops. You already have it more or less in your sight picture. The sight itself is a periscopic sight. It's the M2 with the M19. It is a very simple system. It's got a series of dots. The center dot is not the zero range as you would expect. It's actually 600 yards. Ammunition is a pretty good variety, actually. There's armor piercing, there's high explosive for whatever good a 37mm high explosive round is, canister, blanks, dummies, and they're stowed all around this vehicle, all sorts of room for it. The gun itself, 37mm M6. It's basically a development of the M5, except now you have a semi-automatic breech. You could actually put the M5's barrel onto it. It's a slightly shorter barrel. Not recommended. The manual specifically advises against, because what would happen if you do that, then the mount becomes out of balance. It affects the stabilizer for sure, but it will even make the hand cranks a little bit more difficult to use. You can see the manual trigger for the 37 here. Of course, he does have the coaxial caliber 30 on the far side. The seat itself is actually pretty comfortable. It's a bucket seat, for lack of a better word. You got bolsters on the side to stop you from bouncing off to the side. You got a nice high backrest, and it is adjustable in height. It's a sort of you unscrew a clamp, it springs up and down, then you screw the clamp back into place. We're actually more like a vice than a clamp, actually. Other features in here, there is the turret traverse lock located here. You can see the teeth scattered around. He has his pistol port here if he wishes to shoot with the 45 caliber. If for some reason the caliber 30 and the 37mm canister doesn't do the job. Range of elevation and depression, it's 7 degrees down and 60, that's 60 up, which is pretty good. You can only imagine when this thing was used in the jungle, fire canister to clear Japanese from the treetops. And it does actually beg the question, can you use 37mm canister in the high altitude, high angle anti-aircraft role? I doubt it will have the effective range. I mean, you probably want to be within 300 yards of the airplane when you shoot, but you never know. Anyway, that's it for this side of the vehicle. So let's have a quick look at the loader side. Not that there's much there, it's basically ammo. So hopping over to the loader side, obviously, first of all, he's primarily responsible for the coaxial. It's an M19 19A4 caliber 30 machine gun. British tanks would have 4,084 rounds of 30 cal stowed, mainly for the coaxial. The American tanks with the caliber 30s really everywhere, they had 9,200 rounds. In terms of the 37mm, you see it's scattered all around the turret here, and interestingly, it's stowed nose down. It's 128 rounds are carried. An American tank would have 178, not least because you don't have the radio in the back, so you can just stow more 37mm ammo. To actually load is actually pretty simple because the round is so small, pull it out, lift it up, and just slam it in with your fingertips, basically. The ammunition for the caliber 30 is stowed on the far side of the main gun. There's actually a feed chute that comes over the top. To his right, we have stowage for the 2-inch smoke bombs. Now this fits through a hole here, and it looks like a big pistol. Put your smoke bomb in here, fire it out, and hey presto, you have yourself a bit of a smoke screen. Obviously, later on, this would turn into the smoke grenade launchers, which are mounted on the outside that we all know and love today. In addition to the stowage inside the turret, there's an additional rack for more than I want to count rounds to the front left of the turret. And you can also have a good access here through the turret floor. The panels all open up, and you can access the batteries, which are underneath the turret basket. There's also additional stowage in between the turret basket and the side door. So this single cylinder job here is the auxiliary motor. It's got a 2.5 gallon fuel tank just above it. And this is used primarily to power generator, so you have electrics going to the systems without the use of the main engine, which adds wear, it adds fuel usage. It is also connected to the heater. The heater can be used to preheat the main engine if you're trying to start on a really cold day, or amazement of amazements, you can use it to heat up the crew compartment, a little known luxury back in the early 40s. If you let your battery drain a little bit too far, you can remove the housing on top of the magneto. It reveals a rope for hand starting the vehicle, just like on an old lawnmower. Forward instead of back, you have ammunition racks again for 37mm. Loads of 37 in this tank. And so if you want to open up one of the pistol ports, see it's a little spring-loaded catch, and you can just push down, lift it up. Sort of locks into place. You spray away with your 45 Thompson, and just when you're done, lock it back into place. All right, so if you wanted to get from the turret to the hull, there is two ways of doing it. One is that the turret basket at the left-hand side of the turret is actually pretty much open to allow you to get in through the whole door. So you can spin the turret over to the 3 o'clock position, and that gives you pretty good access. However, you can see they've actually left a hole here at the front of the turret, so it is possible to just simply clamber straight down, which I'm about to do now, assuming I don't kick the cameraman in the face, because it's a tank. It's actually still pretty claustrophobic in here. One knock on the head already. There we go. And we're in. So immediately forward of the turret basket, this is where the 7th man would be if you wanted to have a 7th man in the tank. It is the radio operator's position here. So he would have a backrest here, cushion. Obviously, with the radio being in the turret on the Grant, there is no need for the man or the seat, although I guess you could put one if you wanted, especially if for some reason you did wish to retain the 30 caliber in the bow. You can see the interior fittings for it here. Adjustable in elevation, no way of aiming. So near as I can tell, this little periscope up here, it does rotate, but since the gun doesn't traverse, you might as well just have it facing forward. So the radio operator will be adjustable for elevating the gun. The driver would be responsible for aiming the gun in azimuth. Completely inefficient, waste of space, waste of money, waste of everything. Of interest, there is a tank to my left here, and as near as I can tell, it is a water tank for drinking water, very useful in the desert. I don't know off the top of my head if this was a standard feature or just something that the British and Australians added a little bit later. I can see why it might perhaps have been taking up space for a radio. It's a fairly big tank, but a very nice, thoughtful feature. To his right, the driver. To his further right, so all three are in sort of a triangular formation, is the 75 gunner. So next thing I'll do is hop into the driver's seat, and you can see the relatively unfortunate position that the driver has to suffer with. So as you hop into the driver's seat, you can see he sits astride the transmission, one leg on each side. And I don't know, maybe motorcycle riders are good with this. This is something completely unusual for me, and I don't know how long I can handle it. There is a pedal on each side. The clutch on the left-hand side, the accelerator is on the right. Brakes are controlled by the steering tillers, so you pull both back and that'll stop. There is a parking brake down low on the left-hand side, but that is purely a lock. It's pretty much a physical lock in the transmission, as I can tell from the manual. So there's a reason the manual says do not use the parking brake as a service brake. Now on most of the M3 tillers, on the very top would be the triggers, one on each tiller, for each of the two machine guns. You can imagine why they were being removed together with the rest of the machine guns, but that was how you fired them. The dash is pretty much a standard dash, very simply laid out. So you got the booster and the starter switch. This is for your headlights, wipers. I kid you not, it says wipers, and I'm not entirely sure what it is they're supposed to be wiping. Maybe I'm doing it a disservice. Fuel cutoff. So when you're done with the engine, hit the fuel cutoff, and engine dies. Magneto control, so left, right, or both, or off. A compass. Yes, a magnetic compass. And you kind of wonder, how can they have one in a tank? Well, yeah, the same way you have one in ships. Curiously, there is on any metal object a point of neutrality. I can't remember the exact name of it. But if you place your magnetic compass on this point, it's not going to be affected by the metal of the vehicle. So if I recall correctly, on the Scorpion, it's actually the British CBRT. It's actually located pretty conveniently atop the turret between the commander and the gunner. As we keep on going, it should be noted that in early World War II, there was an attempt made in an inertial navigation system that the tank itself would remember by use of gyroscopes where it was on the map. And if you think about it, remember, in North Africa in the desert, there's no navigation features. I mean, one dune looks pretty much like another. And of course, in the advent before GPS, you're stuck with celestial navigation. You're basically using a sextant with the stars or the sun. Or if you have the inertial navigation system, then fantastic. Of course, in practice, the INS didn't enter service. I have an article up in the Chieftain's Hatch about it, but we move on. There is a clock if you want to know what time it is. And I guess it's a wind-up clock. Cool. Engine hours, oil temperature, oil pressure, voltmeter, ammeter, speedometer goes up optimistically enough to 50 miles an hour. And the tachometer, which goes in reverse. So idle is on the right-hand side and all the way to the anti-clockwise position is 3,000 RPM. It should be limited, I believe, 2,400. Gear lever is on his right-hand side. It's a fairly standard pattern. So you would have to release a latch to put it into first or reverse on the left-hand side. The first gear is really just for special circumstances. You're mired, you're towing something really bad, you're going up an incredibly high hill. Ordinarily, your gear pattern is going to be 2 to the 4. So 2, 3, 4, 5. Very easy. So as you're steering, it is a controlled differential. And what this means is that on the good news, there's always power going to both tracks as you're going around the corner. The bad news is that there is a minimum radius. In this case, it's 31 feet. When you get going, if the engine's cold, you got a fuel primer here. Obviously, of course, as mentioned before, you want to hand crank the engine a couple of revolutions just to make sure that the oil is nicely spread out. Go ahead, prime it, hit boost, hit start. Of course, your mags are set for both, otherwise it's not going to work. Idle it at about 800, give it a rev test. And just like if you're playing around in a Cessna, you check your mags, so both to right, and you see that there's a drop of about 75 revs. Go back to both, go to L, so you drop at 75 revs, and that has just tested your 2 banks of magnetos. After a warm-up period of about 2 or 3 minutes, go ahead, put it into second, and away you go. When you're done, pretty much reverse. You stop, you idle for a couple of minutes, you let it cool down. Obviously you're in neutral, you set your parking brake, fuel cut off, you're done. To see out, the driver has his vision port. Obviously this is in the I'm not getting shot at position. When you are in combat, you would have to release this locking support. It's kind of frozen into place, so I can't do it. This will swing the visor down, and there is a small little periscopic slit basically it looks out of. Of course, I am way forward. I guess in theory, if you're a World War II sized person and you had to get out in a hurry, you probably could squeeze out through here. I'm not sure it's ideal, but if you did have to get out of this tank in a hurry and you're in either the radio operator's position or the driver's position, good luck. This is probably not the easiest tank to get out of. Well, your fault for getting hit in the first place. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is going to hop over one more seat to the right and check out the gunner's position for the 75. Okay, so we're now seated behind the controls for the wonderful 75mm gun M2. And dear God, you do not want to be a tall person driving this. I have hit my head so many times off this. You have to be wearing a hard shell. And I'm actually, I was talking with the cameraman a little earlier about this, but developing a sort of a sixth sense for when your head is about to hit something. And my little alarm bell is perpetually going off as I'm sitting here. So I'm not going to move my head around too much, I hope. And forgive me if I appear perhaps a little bit concerned about my safety. Okay, so traverse and elevation controls. Here and here, dead easy. Now, curiously, and this is one of those issues that comes up when you're doing research, and I may have mentioned before how primary source documentation differs. There are 2 manuals which cover the system. One is the manual for the tank medium M3. And according to that, the gun traverse on this is 15 degrees to each side. Maximum depression is 9, maximum elevation is 19. Okay, fantastic. But then there is also a manual for gun 75mm M2 mounted in tanks. Well, basically this, because it was the only tank really that the M2 was mounted in. It says 14 degrees to each side, 7.5 down and 20 up. Make of that what you will. So the M2 fired an AP round at about 1850 feet per second. The HE round is 1400. However, the US lack of proper experience with the large caliber tank gun really began to show through when they shipped these over to the British and the British started using them. The first problem they had was with the HE fuses. The HE fuses were designed to be fired from artillery. So as you can imagine, the round would land more vertical than not, and it was all very good for the fuse that set off. However, when fired from a tank at infantry at ranges as close as 300 yards, what's going to happen is that the round is going to basically graze the ground and the fuse may not detonate. This was considered to be a bit of a problem. The other problem that they had was that the M72 shot, which was the basic armor-piercing round at the time, had issues with the face-hardened armor of the Panzer III and Panzer IV. Once you went over about 500 yards, the round would shatter, it wouldn't penetrate. And think about it, the Panzer III only had like 5 centimeters of armor. This is also considered to be a bit of a problem. The British solved both problems. For the HE round, what they did was they found a stock of French 75 in Syria. They shipped that over. The French artillery round, the fuse is a bit better. And because the American 75 was basically derived from the French round, it was a simple matter of unscrewing the one, screwing on the other, and had a functioning 75mm HE round. To solve the AP round issue, they turned to the Germans. They had captured about 50,000 tons worth of munitions on the drive to Tobruk. And amongst this haul was a whole bunch of AP rounds for the German 7.5 centimeter L24 is fired on the Panzer IV. And a British officer realized that, what you could do, and the guy's name was Major Northey, was just by tweaking the driving band on the German ammunition, you can mount it to the American cartridge, and all of a sudden you get a better AP round. So they did a whole bunch of those. They also at the same time got the improved American M61 round, and they tried those off and they realized that the two rounds actually had a much better amount of penetration. At 1,000 yards you could punch through a Panzer IV's front. Fantastic. The German round is still preferred though, because the German round had a bursting charge, so once you punched through, it did more damage. The American round just made a hole and basically had spalling and significant emotional events. It wasn't bad. You don't want to have a 75mm round bouncing around inside your tank, regardless of whether it explodes afterwards or not. Anyway, the gun was fully stabilized. As mentioned, you did have to have the counterweight on the front. To aim the gun, the primary sight is the M21 periscope. This was graduated to 3,000 yards in 500-yard increments for AP only. If you wanted to shoot HE, you took your best guess, and I guess a burst and adjust method was probably required to finally put rounds onto target. Now, there was a problem with this. The linkage between the sight and the gun wasn't great. As a result, later model M3s came with the direct vision telescope. It's a T15. It's basically a coaxial telescope that was considered to be a lot more accurate. Linkage problems did continue on. We had exactly the same problem with the early versions of the M4 Sherman as well, solved exactly the same way. You put a direct vision scope. Last thing I'll point out is that the gunner's seat is attached to the casemate. So as the gun is rotated, the gunner's seat moves with it. Which is fine because it keeps his head in pretty good position compared to the sight. And let's say he's got enough room for his leg that he's not going to get too badly crushed. So that's it for the gunner's position. One more to go. The last position in the tank, number 6 or 7, depending on which version you are, the loader for the main gun, 75mm. It's a god-awful position, I'm afraid to say. It reminds you a little bit of the Egg Panzer 38T. He is directly behind the tube, and his job is to get rounds, 35 of which are stowed down here, out, and then forward and into the tube. Now, there are 65 rounds available to the British loader. 35 of them here. I'm not entirely sure where the others go. Hopefully it's over by the radio operator's compartment and just removed from this vehicle. Here we have stowage for yet more 37mm, so you can imagine which was supposedly the primary used weapon half the time. American tanks, they only had 50 rounds of 75, and that's where I'm coming with this conclusion that perhaps the British extra ammo comes with the deleted radio man. Above them, we do have the roof hatch, another way of getting in and out, and frankly, if you're driving along in the desert, it's probably great to stick your head out and get a bit of fresh air as you're driving, the wind blowing through your helmet. There is directly behind him another pistol port, and there is a fuel tank gauge just here to the left behind the basket. You can also see the propeller shaft, which is covered with a protective housing so the loader doesn't have his legs deleted. That's it for the interior. We're gonna hop out and close up. Of the approximately 5,667, approximate number, accepted it from the factories, Lend-Lease took the majority of them. The British received just shy of 2,900 and the Soviets about 1,400. The M3 was very well accepted in the British service. It was reliable, it had a good gun, things that British tanks did not have. The Soviets had a more mixed opinion on the thing. Yeah, it was reliable, yeah, it was well built, but it didn't really suit the Soviet terrain, and frankly the Soviets were already building some pretty reasonable tanks of their own, so it's much less of an improvement. The vehicle did continue to see service. Of course, it was made obsolete by the M4 medium, the Sherman. But if you went to East Asia in the jungles against the Japanese, who frankly didn't have great anti-tank weapons to begin with, and certainly the tanks were pretty miserable, the M3 was still a very capable vehicle, and so it saw service pretty much through to the end of the war. Initially, the production run was only going to be 350 vehicles. However, the demand from the UK in particular was so great for 75mm gun tanks that they couldn't afford to stop producing tanks on the factory to retool to build the better M4. So it wasn't until later, when more tank production plants came online, that they were finally able to phase out production of the M3 and move to the Sherman, which would serve the Allies for the rest of the war. That was it. Hope you enjoyed the tour of the M3 Medium. We'll see you on the next one.